No. I'll tell you. 1 second. Page number 76, T.S. Eliot, Life and Works. We were in block
Yes.
3. From there, I'll continue, then move on to block 4 also. Okay, ma?
Okay.
Yeah. So let me just share the screen. I'm just sharing the screen. Hold on for a second. Can you see this? Is the screen visible, ma?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So here we already discussed T.S. Eliot, his biography. Okay. So maybe I can quickly recap about it. So he's one of the most remarkable uh, of English poets. He had great influence on poetry for more than 40 years. He sees poetry and ceremony as forces that can give meaning to the emptiness and confusion of the modern world. He gives great importance to the forces that make it possible for. And please remember, we are into which um, era, if you can remember? Yeats and Eliot. Yeah?
Victoria era,
No,
ma'am.
no, no. We are done with it. It was modern era. Yeah?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Modern era.
Yes. I
Yes,
told you, right? You remember? I
yes,
even,
yes.
yes. So, and as you all know, that modern, the poetry of 20th century, which had a lot of, the society was quite chaotic, and there was a lot of, world war effect of world wars, and so, and he gives great importance to the forces that make it possible for spiritual as well as physical life to continue. Right. And The Wasteland is Eliot's major work. It's very long and complex poem. The poem contains many old myths and literary allusions, languages, music, as well as different kinds of characters. There is spiritual dryness in the wasteland where renewal of life is impossible. The poem shows the emptiness and meaninglessness of modern life and modern world. Eliot sees the root cause of modern world's unhappiness and confusion is the people's inability to bring together the different areas of their experience to make a complete and healthy whole. Right. So he, has a taste for classical literature influenced by the late 19th century French poets. And poetry had to be complex to express the complexities of modern life. I think we've completed all this, if I
Yes,
remember.
ma'am.
Yes, yes. So, The Journey of the Magi by T.S. Eliot is a three-stanza poem which is separated into sets of lines which vary in length. The first stanza contains 20 lines, the second 11, and the third 12. Look at the stanzas unequally divided. The poem doesn't have a structure. Now, this is what is the quality of a modern poem. They don't stick to any sort of pattern. There is nothing like, a rule kind of a thing. It's like just blank verse. I mean, as and what they want to, they can express it. So that was what happened during modern age, right? The poem doesn't have a structured rhyme scheme, although there are a number of instances in which end words or phrases repeat. This creates a sense of unity to the poem, and which is only emphasized by the speaker's direct storytelling. Now, the title of the poem refers to a journey, right? This word means an act of traveling from one place to another, but also, in a metaphorical sense, the long and often difficult process of personal change and development. So, the journey of the title describes the literal and mythic journey of the Magi across the desert to bring gifts to Jesus, the Christian Messiah. It also describes the Magi's internal journey from pagan to Christian. So, Journey of the Magi by T.S. Eliot describes the terrible conditions through which the Magi traverse to meet the Christ child after his birth. The poem begins with the speaker listing out all of the troubles he and his men faced on their way to the manger in which Christ was born. The weather was freezing and there was hardly any food or shelter. Every time they came to a town, they were turned away. Even the camels were suffering. So, in the second stanza, the men get to where they were going and find it to be simply satisfactory. The manger has no great presence, but that doesn't mean the experience wasn't important. The true impact of the journey and meeting come after the men have returned home. They are no longer the people they were before they set off. I mean, this is kind of a transition, the kind of change which happens in the life of a human being. Okay. And that is metaphorically given as a word as journey. That's a journey, right? From the childhood to the adulthood, there is a kind of a journey. So they are no longer the people they were before they set off. The speaker states that he longs for a second death through which he is able to join God. Okay, so the poem is about awareness and rebirth and the pain that often comes with learning and new awareness. The Magus narrator is lamenting the spiritual awakening that the birth of Jesus brought upon him. His old life and luxuries and indulgences are lost to him forever, and the old way of life is dead. He cannot continue with his old beliefs, and it is for this that he wishes for his own death. The birth of Jesus was for him a rupture between the old and the new, and once having known the new, he cannot stay with the old either in his beliefs or habits. Now, poetic techniques. The poem is written in free verse. This is what I mentioned just now, free verse. I mean, absolutely no rhythm, rhyme, no kind of a commonality. I mean, even the stanzas differ in terms of lines per stanza. And techniques like it is allusion, the stories in reference to the Gospels, alliteration, sleeping in snatches. You can see that sir sound being repeated, sleeping in snatches, and with the voices singing in our ears saying. So this is alliteration. Then there's anaphora and running away and wanting their liquor and women. And the night fires going out and the lack of shelters. You see this and being repeated again and again, and the cities and hostile. Okay, okay, right. So So this is basically it's a journey of the Magi. It's like the journey the wise people undertook who were guided by the bright star to Bethlehem, where baby Jesus was born. It's a symbolic poem constituting birth as well as death, renewal, and spiritual rebirth. Right. So if you look at the narrator, he's a Magi whose account is split into three stanzas, separate parts. First is the journey to the birthplace and the doubt, and the arrival, the prefiguring and satisfaction, the reflection and acknowledgement of a new faith. Okay. Now moving on to the next, before we run out of the time, I think I need to quicken up because we need to complete our fourth block also today. Right. Ted Hughes. Okay. And He's also one of the greatest 20th centuries poet. Okay, and born on August 17, 1930, and Mithilmroyd and Yorkshire. He emerged as one of the giants of 20th century British poetry. His first published poem appeared in 1954, the year he graduated from Cambridge. He used two pseudonyms for the early publications. What are pseudonyms? They are false names of the pen names. So sometimes they do not want to reveal their name, their identity. So instead, they do write, they do get the things published, but under different pen name, and that is called pseudonym. Now, Daniel Hearing and Peter Crewe. And after serving the Royal Air Force, Hughes studied archaeology and anthropology in Cambridge, taking a special interest in myths and legend. Now, he is concerned with strong and violent forces of nature. D.H. Lawrence influences him by making the animals and birds the subject of many of his poems. The poet intends to express the human condition. Therefore, his animals are powerful as symbols. Hughes attempts to capture the mystery of life and experience of animal characterization. Right. So now this is what I've already mentioned. He's a nationality. He's an English by nationality, and he's a poet. Now, his other poems are The Hawk in the Rain, Lupercal, Wadwo, Recklings, Crow, Cave Birds, Gaudete, and Moodtown Diary, Remains of Elmet, and so on. Okay, these are some of his other poems here given here. And he's in fact a nature poet, a keen countryman and hunter from a young age. He viewed writing poems as a continuation of his earlier passion. This is, like hunting, and the poem is a new species of creature. And that is what he kind of associates his poetry with, an animal. Okay, so he says writing poetry is just like hunting, and the poem is a new species of creature, a new specimen of the life outside your own. Right. Now, The Thought Fox is the title of the poem, which is prescribed for our syllabus, written by Ted Hughes. Okay. And what is The Thought Fox? It's a 6-stanza poem, all quatrains. Okay. And with one or two full end rhymes and hints of slant rhyme here and there. There is no set meter, but through careful use of punctuation and enjambment, the rhythms of the fox as it moves onto the page come through. The Thought Fox by Ted Hughes was published in his poetry collection titled The Hawk in the Rain in 1957. It received wide acclaim and helped establish Hughes a prominent figure in modern poetry. The poem beautifully links nature with the process of creative thinking. Set at midnight, a time that blends darkness with the potential for new ideas, it takes us into the poet's world. Hughes paints a picture of loneliness and anticipation as he faces a blank page. This setting serves as a backdrop for the emergence of a fox, a symbol of an unfolding idea, showcasing the journey from a blank mind to a moment of creative breakthrough. And it was first published in the British poet Ted Hughes' debut collection, and The Hawk in the Rain in 1957. Now, this is all about creativity, inspiration, and the process of writing poetry. He generally, the speaker generally taken to be Hughes himself, sits alone during the dark quiet of a winter night, fingers poised over a blank page. A fox appears outside the window and makes a tentative but purposeful journey across the snow before leaping and into the speaker's mind, at which point the page is printed and the poem is complete. Now, this thought fox, please remember the fox is not the true and the real one. He happens to kind of imagine, that is his ideas and thoughts. As I told you earlier itself, the poetry, he would always compare it with hunting. Okay, writing a poetry is nothing but like a hunting. So where he thinks, he comes across a page which is quite blank because he is unable to pen down his poetry. Then suddenly he imagines a fox which is outside moving here and there. And when it is up, just before leaping into, then what happens is he starts to get some kind of ideas and thoughts and imagination, and being creative, he starts writing the poem. It means that uh, it's a metaphor. The thought fox can be thought of as a metaphor for inspiration and creative thought, which seem to come from a mysterious place separate from the speaker's conscious mind. The poem treats the fox in mostly literal terms, however, and in doing so proves the power of poetry to bring new worlds and creatures to vivid life on the page. Now, as I told you, this is nothing but it's a poem about writing poetry. Uh, and Fox is like, a kind of an inspiration for him because he's an animal lover. So he thinks that the wandering ideas in his mind, the thoughts in his mind are similar to a fox. Okay. And he sits by a window at midnight, struggling to write. He soon realizes he may not be as lonely as he feels. Outside, a fox creeps at the forest's clearing. The speaker watches the fox wander between trees and stumps, pausing now and again to sniff a leaf or twig that captures his interest. Then, inspiration, like the fox slowly, then suddenly emerging from the forest, strikes the speaker. The clock ticks past midnight as he finally puts his pen to the page. Right. So this is basically Thought Fox is nothing but a poem about writing a poem. Now at the beginning of the poem, the paper is blank, and as we come to the end, the paper is filled. In between, what happens? The speaker describes the creative process. It explicates the nature of literary inspiration and literary creation. So the action of the poem takes place at midnight, where the speaker is sitting alone at his desk, the silence interrupted only by the ticking of the clock. So the image evoked is one of quiet and solitude, where the poet is cut off from the world, ready to be transported by his literary imagination. Right. So here, the fox, which is a metaphorically stated element here, which is, at the end, when he's about to put down the words or the poem on the paper, it's like this, the fox is coming near, and suddenly it enters into the head of the poet, right? This process is metaphorically referred to the entering of the dim and blurry idea. I mean, the ideas has come into his mind, right? And becoming clear and familiar to the poet. And the ticking of the clock symbolizes the ticking of the poet's mind to express it in any form. Finally, the fox enters into his head and the blank paper of the poet is printed. So the blank sheet of paper can only be printed when there is thought and imagination. So the title is The Thought Fox. Okay, right. So let us quickly move on to the next poet. And that is, okay, fine. We are done with block 3, right? Now we are moving on to block 4. Right. Here we go. Um, Henry Wordsworth Longfellow. Just a second. Let me just check. Can you see the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So now we are moving into American poetry. Okay. So up to block 3, it was the Renaissance, the Elizabethan period, then the, neoclassical period, then the Romantic period, then the Victorian period, and the modern era. Okay. The poets of all those periods we have done. But now we are moving into a different, that is American poetry. American poetry is different from the British poetry, and it's a separate genre from the British. Okay. And you need to understand the social and political conditions distinct to America and their manifestation in the poetry. So the poem which we come across, the poets and all, they are like, they reflect the social and the political conditions of America at that point of time. So you read their poems and you will find it how it was. So now completely different. The fourth block is all about the American poetry. Right. So Native Americans were the people who came from Asia and different other parts of the world. In 1492, Christopher Columbus made first contact with these indigenous people. Hence, poetry in Native American period was an oral tradition and mode of writing was highly conservative. When it appeared in written form, it was, highly influenced by British poetry of 18th century when romantic poets were trying to contact nature of different scale. The early colonial American poetry was also influenced by Puritanism, and it can be analyzed in the poetry by Thomas Morton and Anne Bradstreet, who is known as the first recorded poets of British colonies in America. Right. The 13 American colonies declared themselves as independent of the British Empire on 4th July 1776. There was a British colonization even in America also. So they have got the independence from Britishers, and it was that, right, on 4th July 1776. Right. The need to be free from British poetic models and tradition is an important concern of the post-independence American poets. So what they did was not just the independence of their people, they also wanted to ensure that they are free from British poetic models. They did not want to, kind of, ape these kind of poetic of the traditions of the Britishers. They wanted to have something of their own. So the Declaration of American Independence made American poets to search their own poetic models and traditions different from European. Hence, the post-independence American poetry somehow reflects the voice of its people. Some important names appeared in this time, such as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Edgar Allan Poe, Walt Whitman, and Emily Dickinson, etc. So American Transcendentalism is one of the biggest hits of entire American literary history, which chiefly came from European Thoreau and Whitman. It began in 1848 as a protest against the general state of culture and society. Right. Now, modern American poetry is called the richest. This is called the richest time in American poetic history. Both Imagism and Harlem Renaissance helped American poets to create a music and voice of their own. The poets of this time rejected traditional forms and received diverse influences in order to experiment more and more with poetry. The significant poets of this time are Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, and Robert Frost. Right. I think we have H.W. Longfellow, Walt Whitman, and we also have Robert Frost, Langston Hughes, right? And we'll be doing this. And then W.H. Auden and Maya Angelou. Okay, these are the poets which we are going to do. So post-World War II, American poetry of this time was purely academic and traditional. Poets became cautious of forms and customs. The poetry of this time was highly modeled on different poetic forms like confessional movement, Beats generation poetry, and Black Mountain poetry. The significant poets of this time period were Elizabeth Bishop, Robert Lowell, and Sylvia Plath. So now the poetic movements were Black Arts Movement, revival of Beats poetry, poetry on web. Then style of poetry was surrealism and hippies. And in 1980 saw the rise of women's poetry, emergence of multicultural poetry, then contemporary era, The present time poetry has moved out of the mainstream and on to colleges and universities. Right. So here, if you look at the topics of American poetry, what are its chief features? Okay, and which we're going to look into H.W. Longfellow and Walt Whitman. They include slavery, division, identity, honor, self-esteem, self-exile, migration, poverty, exploration, religious freedom and dogmas, self-discovery, self-doubt, self-examination, exoteric emotions and feelings, etc. These would be the topics or the themes of the poems which they have written during this point of time. So the spectrum of English poetry is narrower than American. It talks about diverse issues of society, love, romance, nature, spirituality, mysticism, and humanitarianism, democracy, cultural nationalism, traditions, and mythology, etc. Now, here, self remains at the heart of American poetry, whether it is Walt Whitman or Emily Dickinson or Emerson or Robert Frost or Sylvia Plath. I remains an expansive, inclusive, and microcosmic phenomenon to American poets. American poetry is an endless chain of self doubt and self examination because I, my, and me remains a microcosmic experience for poets of America. That's why it is said that American poetry is a bold curiosity of self, unlike English. Right. So we move on to H.W. Longfellow, that is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, was an American poet and educator whose works include Paul Revere's Ride, The Song of Hiawatha, and Evangeline. He was the first American to translate Dante's Alighieri Divine Comedy and was one of the fireside poets from New England. He was born on February 27th, 1807, Portland, Maine, US. Died on March 24th, 1882, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Okay. Longfellow wrote many lyric poems known for their musicality and often presenting stories of mythology and legend. He became the most popular American poet of his day and had success overseas. He has been criticized by some, however, for imitating European styles and writing specifically for the masses. Much of Longfellow's work is categorized as lyric poetry, but he experimented with many forms, including hexameter and free verse. Okay, these are some of his works. Okay, now these are the poetry collections of H.W. Longfellow. Now, what is it being prescribed for us now? A Psalm of Life. Okay, this is written by H.W. Longfellow, A Psalm of Life. This is what we're going to read. So, it's a lyrical poem full of religious emotions. It was published in October 1838. A psalm is a sacred song. You know, a psalm is a song. You all know that? Right. And invocation to the mankind to follow the path of righteousness. So the poet advises people to be heroes in their lives. He asks them to live in the present without thinking about the task in the poem is to instruct and guide and to inspire people. The poem teaches basic human values and lays down the foundation of prosperous ethical life. The poem consists of 9 stanzas of 4 lines each. It has a regular rhyming scheme and each stanza follows the rhyme scheme ABAB. In every stanza, the first line rhymes matches with the third line and second line rhymes with fourth line. I mean, it's properly rhymed. So how many stanzas are there in this poem? Please tell me. Yeah. There are 9. Okay. And
9, ma'am.
yes, 9 stanzas are there.
2, 3, 4.
Page number 94, 93 and 94. Yeah.
90. Okay.
Okay. Right. So he explains that he doesn't want to know the length of his life. Life is an empty dream. Dreams are normally fantasy and impossible. He tries to explain that life is not an empty dream. It is real and could be great and has a meaning. If you are alive and awake, doesn't mean you are living. Someone that does not take part in life. So doesn't mean that you are, awake, and doesn't mean that you are alive. I mean, he says you need to make some kind of a difference, isn't it? Right. He explains that he doesn't want to know the length of, I mean, humans are not meant to live and die. They are meant to be remembered. The birth and death of a person will not be remembered by the others, but if they do good deeds in their life, it will be hard to forget someone's deeds. And we are unaware of how we will end our lives. In the end, it is not about what we have acquired or how much we have it. It is about knowing that who we are now is better than where we started. We have little time on this earth, that even though our bodies may grow weak, it's our hearts that will remain forever strong. So this life contains a lot of struggles, but we must remember that it is temporary and the goal is a much better place. So be smart while you are here, stand out. Don't follow the path that a person chooses is not suitable according to you. Don't follow like cattle does blindly. Follow and have faith on the leader without knowing the fact. So let me just give you a few more points about this. It's like a clarion call, okay, for young people searching for meaning in their lives. The poem guides them not be complacent, passive, and grimly await death. I mean, don't think that you are the, kind of a dust, like, from cradle to grave, from dust to the dust. It's not like that. He says there is a purpose, there is a meaning for life, isn't it? So it's an inspiration for people who are ready to act and achieve, to strive and fail and learn from their mistakes. So, according to the poet, faint doctrines, conservatism, and pessimism have no place here. Life is more than an empty dream. Young people must optimally expend their physical and mental might to accomplish things while they are on this earth. They must seek to leave a legacy to be proud of. The poem represents the youthful, enthusiastic spirit of the American dream in an era of profound flux and change. And the poet advocates using the mind. He wants it to be done in an active way. One should avoid being complacent or passive or letting oneself devolve into grief or pessimism due to the fact that life is short. So that is what he wants to. He says you just leave a footprints, okay, where the others need to follow. So this is a poem which is known for its optimism and the theme right attitude of life. That's very, very important. Your attitude is very important. You be positive, things are all positive. You are pessimistic, things are all negative. Okay, it all depends on your thought process. Okay, so try being very enthusiastic about life. So life is something, a kind of a boon. So the poet gives out the message that pleasure or sorrow is not the goal of life. The purpose of life is to carry out all the duties and responsibilities for the progress and good of all. We should realize life is shorter and quicker. Life is like a battlefield, and we should not let ourselves be driven like cattle. Cattle, like, you know, I mean, you just blindly follow others. It's not like that. Okay. And it's like a battlefield. Each one is like a soldier. I mean, they have to have their own, they have to charge against and try to beat it and fight it, take the opportunities and take the challenges. Okay. And we should fight bravely as heroes. The poet points out that the past and the future are of no significance. We should concentrate in making the best out of the present. So living in the present is very, very important. So past is a bygone thing where you cannot get it back or get back to that past. Future is not in your hands. No one can say what happens in future, right? So we have no right on those past and future. It's only the present which we have it in our hand. Okay. And we may also follow footsteps of great men who had laid their footsteps on sands of time, right? Right. Next, we are moving into Walt Whitman, right? So it's Oh Captain, My Captain. That's the poem written by Walter Whitman, right? So born on May 31st, On 1819, on Long Island, grew up in Brooklyn and received limited formal education. He took up various jobs as a printer, school teacher, reporter, and editor. And he is also a poet, essayist, and journalist. Used unusual images and symbols, including rotting leaves, tufts of straw, and debris, and labeled as the father of free verse, though he did not invent it. And his famous works are Leaves of Grass, Drum Taps, Franklin Evans, or The Inebriate, A Tale of the Times. Okay, these are some of his. And he also wrote a lot about his country, USA, America. Many poems of the time celebrated the United States with all its struggle as a young and forming nation. Whitman's poems represent those struggles about the Civil War better than any other American poet. Although Whitman never fought in the war, he was closely involved as a caretaker for the wounded. He also worked as a journalist for newspapers. Right. So here it goes, the background, the history of this poem. Okay, here it is. The American president Abraham Lincoln was assassinated on 14th April 1865, just 5 days after the end of Civil War. He was the true hero of American people. He strived hard to abolish slavery in America. So he was Whitman's real hero and very dear to him. Whitman became very depressed as his hero. Rishda, can you please mute yourself, ma? Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. No problem. So he was very much depressed after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, because he was a real hero for him. So as his hero passed away, he was very unhappy about it. To mourn the loss of his president, Whitman wrote, "Oh, Captain, my Captain." The poem is an elegy. You know what is an elegy? It's a mournful poem. You mourn about the death of someone, isn't it? That's a sad kind of a tone it has, melancholic kind of a poem, which uses the extended metaphor. He also wrote, "When lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed," which is a long poem in the form of an elegy on the death of Abraham Lincoln. Right. So a sailor, this is the poem, okay? A sailor, "Oh, Captain, my Captain." A sailor sings a song. It's not the usual song of sailor. He is singing a song that praises his captain for leading the ship and crew into the harbor after a long and dangerous voyage. Everyone is on shore celebrating the safe homecoming when the sailor notices that the captain is lying dead on the deck of the ship. This is an irony of the situation. While the crowd on the shore is celebrating, unaware of the fallen leader, the sailor walks mournfully upon the deck where the captain has fallen. So here the rhyme thing is, so now, so the poem, as I told you, was written when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, okay, during the American Civil War. So now it's a kind of a, the theme of patriotism towards which he tries to draw the attention of the readers. So here the captain in the poem represents the assassinated president. So the ship represents the war-weathered nation following the Civil War. The prize represents the Union of the States. So that's the prize they have received, the Union of the States, after he actually worked for it. Abraham Lincoln had worked for it. So all the states got united, right? The speaker, torn between relief and despair, captures America's confusion at the end of the Civil War. It's the ambiguity that he expresses, a moral conflict, whether to celebrate the victory of the Civil War or to lament a leader's death. See, such a tough condition, isn't it? It's like a point when he can celebrate it, but at the same time, the man actually who led this kind of a war and he's no more, it's something very sad. So hence the tone in the first half of the poem is joyful and celebratory. Eventually the tone shifts into a depressed and heartbroken one. Okay. And also known as the father of free verse, the poet follows a particular rhyme scheme that perpetuates the deep emotions associated with it. It's like first stanza A, B, C, D, E, F, E. The second stanza G, G, H, I, J, E, E-K-E. And the third one is L-L-M-N-O-E-P-E. So alliterations, flag is flung, safe and sound. So fur is being repeated. Sir, repeated, safe and sound. That's an alliteration. Then repetition occurs many times. Oh, captain, my captain, fallen and dead. That's a repetition which happens. Okay. Right. Now, next we move on to, but that's really very, I mean, I find it quite emotional. When you read this poem, you really find it quite emotional. I mean, it's like a elegy, and it's very interesting to read. Right. So then we move on to Unit 10, Robert Frost, J.M. Langston Hughes. Okay. So Robert Frost, before going into this, that is, they both are of American poets, Robert Frost and J.W. Langston Hughes. So we'll have to look a bit into the Afro-American literature. So what is this Afro-American literature? It is African American literature. It's not purely American literature now. It's again from Unit 10, this is what we're going to take up, right? So in America, racism spread around the country. There was a kind of a discrimination, racial discrimination. Now, because of that, people wanted to come up with their writings and literature to bring in this sort of awareness to curb this discrimination. So this is called Afro-American literature. So racism spread around the country, especially in the South. Black people were treated offensively. They did not have full rights as the white citizens. Due to these facts, many Black writers responded with a set of literary works and used their skills in writing to reflect on their life. Thus, they have reached an artistic level and produced creative works. African American literature involves poetry and slave narratives. The civil rights and Black arts movements played great roles in the development of African American writing. So here, African American literature presents a wide range of writings from the colonial period to the present. It is related to different literary periods: the colonial period, antebellum period, the Reconstruction period, the protest movement, and contemporary period, that is from 1970 to till now. Through poetry, sermons, letters, and slave narratives, African American literature of the colonial period was a means of breaking the bonds of slavery. I mean, this is what they wanted to get rid of, the slavery, by poetry or by letters, by narratives, slave narratives especially. So, I mean, they would feel very bad about it, very offended. So they just wanted to come out of it. So in New England, those slaves who were close with their masters' families exchanged stories. So this has become an inevitable part of American literature, African American literature. It's only with a significant representation of African American literature, American society stands to be cleansed from the problem of a racial discrimination. African American literature has examined the problem of racial discrimination in all its philosophical, existential, and epistemological aspects. It has traveled from mid-18th century with slave narratives to the current times with all its socio-literary exuberance, initiating a literary and cultural transformation in the fabric of American society. Okay, let us quickly move on to the poem by Robert Frost, Mending Wall. Okay, right. So Robert Frost, his first poem was published in 1894, lived in England from 1912 to 15, and he published 2 collections while living there with the help of Ezra Pound. He's the most celebrated poet in America, won many awards, including 4 Pulitzer Prizes. And most frequent subject is New England landscape. Believed meter was essential to poetry at a time when free verse was becoming the norm. So what is this poem Mending Wall all about? It's a metaphorical poem, just like the Fox poem, which we have come across. So Mending Wall is also a metaphorical poem written in blank verse, and it's set in the countryside, and it is about one man questioning why he and his neighbor must rebuild the stone wall dividing their farms each spring. It is perhaps best known for the line spoken by the neighbor, good fences make good neighbors. Okay. And the poem's narrator displays a disdain. Disdain is like he's resenting, he doesn't like it, for the expression and the walls erected between people. Yet he also shows a grudging acceptance of the line's truth in its application to human relationships. The poem is set in the countryside in spring. 45-line poem, one verse paragraph, no stanzas. If you have noticed it, there are absolutely no stanzas in it. Okay. And the use of I makes it more like a monologue or one-person dramatic speech. You all know that what a monologue is, right? You've already come across. Okay. So Frost describes the border between two farms, people, or the people, explores stubbornness in a conservative farmer who blindly follows tradition. On a deeper level, Mending Wall examines how humans deal with each other and live isolated lives. A farmer, probably in New England, participates in the yearly ritual of mending the wall between his and his neighbor's property, takes up a philosophic analysis of the purpose of the wall. The poem has two main subjects, the wall and the speaker's neighbor. And the speaker sees both the practicality of maintaining the wall in some places, I mean, not everywhere. For instance, where there are cows, I mean, the cattle and the cows, you need a wall. And the impracticality of maintaining the wall where there is no physical need for it, apples and pines. Okay. And he calls the task of mending the wall a game and remarks, we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. And what is the dominant imagery over here? It's the wall and the farms. So wall, a rough stone wall of irregularly shaped stones, typical of New England landscape, formed with odd rocks from the fields, made to be useful, not beautiful. And we picture pastures with cows and apple, orchard, woodlots, etc. So the theme of this poem, Mending Wall, is that a respectful distance between neighbors is the recipe for harmonious relationships. Good fences make good neighbors. I mean, having a kind of a proper respectful distance, not interfering too much with each other. I mean, they need to have some sort of wall erected. I mean, literally not a wall, but yes, maintain a sort of distance. Cooperation between neighbors. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill. The futility of a country custom. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, right? So this poem is believed to have been written by Frost to build upon a relationship with his neighbor, a French Canadian in New Hampshire. The poem discusses contrasting ideologies through two rural neighbors who on a spring day happen to walk along the wall that separates their properties. The speaker in the opening lines talks about the inconvenience of having a wall. He's a progressive individual and questions the need for such a barrier. Now he says something there is that doesn't love a wall, the frozen ground, the hunters, the yelping dogs do not keep the wall intact. It becomes a great deal for the speaker and his neighbor to balance the boulders so that the wall is in place. Now according to the speaker, the wall creates barrier. It's like a barrier. And it questions what is it they are trying to separate and secure. Their fields are different and also there are no enemies around, but still there is a wall. Right. But then again, he also points out that he is of the belief that good fences make good neighbors. So whatever the reasons the speaker gives, he pays no heed. He continues with the age-old dictum of having the wall. The word mending in the title of the poem, when taken as an adjective way, also refer to a distinguished relationship the speaker and his neighbor share, which they are trying to mend. Okay. Now moving on to the next poem, that is by Langston Hughes, I Too. Right. I Too Sing America by Langston Hughes. So Langston Hughes, let me just give you a brief biography. James Mercer Langston Hughes, an American poet, is considered one of the earliest innovators of the new literary art form called jazz poetry. He's a novelist, playwright, short story writer, columnist, also popular for his blues poetry. He's a popular leader of the Harlem Renaissance and the first to join the musicians in the late 1930s to popularize the movement. What was the movement? Harlem Renaissance. Hughes and his fellow tried to depict the low life of the African Americans in their art. So they resisted very vehemently the division and prejudices based on color within the Black community. He wrote The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, published in The Nation in 1926, widely known to have become their manifesto. He spent much of his life in Harlem, writing poetry and fiction that portrayed the lives of the working class Blacks in America. He portrayed life as full of struggle and hardships combined with joy, laughter, and music. He publicly confronted racial stereotypes, protested social conditions, and tried to give a better stance to the image of the African Americans. He became popularly known as People's Poet, uniting people of African descent across the globe to encourage pride in their diverse Black folk culture and Black aesthetic. So this poem, I Too, it's an invocation by Hughes as he expresses his belief that African Americans are a valuable part of the country's population and that he foresees a racially equal society in the near future. Right. So I Too is an anti-discrimination poem. Which shows the injustices of racism. The poem is situated in America and describes a black man's personal experience with racial discrimination. He is treated as if he is an embarrassment to the white people and made to feel inferior to them. The tone changes throughout the poem. In the first line, the tone is patriotic. The line, I Too Sing America, indicates the national anthem and symbolizes unity throughout the nation. In the next stanza, the tone is of anger, strength, and determination. The man is enraged at how he is treated, but he knows is strong enough to fight back. This is evident in the line, but I laugh and eat and grow strong. And the man wants the people that he will demand to be treated equal. Overall, this poem shows Hughes' ability to persevere despite unequal conditions in America. Next. Now, these are some of his works. He had written more than 60 books. He wrote in many genres, poetry, fiction, autobiographies, and children's books. The first published was one of his most famous, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. And he wrote his first book of poetry entitled The Weary Blues. He wrote his first novel in 1930 entitled Not Without Laughter, which won the Harmon Gold Medal for Literature. Now, this is a poem which talks about how America covers up her racial discrimination problems. He also wants to convey the importance of racial equality. He wants the reader to understand that this is not just a personal experience, but a voice of his people. Okay. Now, I think we may not be able to complete this. Just a minute left. So I better stop here and take up this W.H. Auden and continue with the fifth block in the next session. Okay. With the Auden. Yeah. W.H. Auden. Yeah. And his poem, The Unknown Citizen. Of course, this is again Unit 11. From here, it is Unit 11. Okay. The Unit 11, along with the fifth block, I will finish it tomorrow in the next class. Is that clear, all of you? Right. So I'll be leaving the session now. See you tomorrow for the last block and the last day of the our online classes. Okay, last block and the last day of the online sessions. If you have, okay, most welcome.